Welcome everybody to the Boston Office 365 user group. We're meeting here in Burlington in the Microsoft Learning Center, or the meeting conference center. In the future, Microsoft now is going to start enforcing the rules where we need to have people do the Eventbrite event registration. There's no more dropping at the last minute. So please, make sure you go onto the Eventbrite, register for the event. We'll get your name over to the front desk here. But just an FYI, no more walking in last minute. It's the rules they've always had. They're just going back to them. Got a couple of hosts in the room. I haven't updated the slides, but we have Dimitri from Digital Partners. I myself, Bill Gunning, I work for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I am technical engagement lead working with the agencies. David Pileggi, who's not here tonight, working at Staples. And then we have Mike Dixon in the room. At Wellington Street Consulting, who I have not updated the slides, but he's also in the room. So a quick agenda. This is what we typically do. We just do some quick updates, sponsor highlights, and we go into the feature speaker. And then afterwards, we'll do QA. And after the event, we do go out for drinks. So if you want to partake in that, we'll have information afterwards. And if you're in the room, there's a raffle. Previous session by David Pileggi, which I hope is remote today. Yeah. And the Staples case study was a great presentation. I have to finish editing the video and it'll be hopefully uploaded this weekend. So I apologize for that. But keep an eye out on my YouTube channel for it. Microsoft 365 updates from last time. I try to go through the tenant, and I go through the events and try to pick out anything that's new or that's happened since last time. So Microsoft Teams has done an enhancement with security and updates. Basically, they're labeling the participants now to kind of give you an idea of who they are. Are they trusted? So if you have a tenant-to-tenant trust, they'll show up. If they're unverified, if they're in your tenant as a guest. So Microsoft trying to do some labeling here on your meetings. So it'll be interesting when they roll that out to see how it works. I don't think I've seen it yet. Is anybody? No. Also in Microsoft Teams meetings, they have an option now to optimize videos for playback. You always had to go include system audio sound. So they made it a little easier now to go to that menu to include the audio from the video, but you can also optimize that video. So they do something to allow the video to play better. So that's going to be an interesting new feature when that comes out. That's be rolling out in March. Microsoft Teams chat for organizers. This is another new feature. Looks like you can set up a meeting. It says something about town hall meeting, Dimitri, which I wasn't familiar with. I don't know if that was a different type of meeting, but they talked about town hall meeting. But you can set up chats just for the organizers and also for guests before and after the meeting.
Yeah, I believe that's an evolution of the live.
The live. Okay, so it's a new name for live town hall. Because I'm like, okay, is this yet something else or is this similar to live? Okay. So it's a new feature coming as well in March. Microsoft List Enhanced Form. So they now have the ability where you can create a form and give somebody a link to the form. So they don't have to end up going to your SharePoint site directly. They can just get the form link, fill it out, and then it goes directly into the list. So similar to Microsoft Forms, like I use Microsoft Forms a lot, and I do a Power Automate flow to bring the data over to a SharePoint list. Looks like now you could just give them a link right to the list items. They still need permission. So where Microsoft Forms, somebody does not need permission to the list. So it sounds like in this scenario, it's really for internal users only who still must have permissions to that list.
We have a lot more powerful questions.
Yeah, I'm hoping the forms will be better. So that's gonna be really interesting when that rolls out. It's even gonna be rolling out on GCC, so I'm excited about that. When that happens, and it says April, so usually I don't get updates that quickly on GCC, so I'm really looking forward to this one. Yeah. So Microsoft SharePoint embedded containers. So this is something I've been following a lot of the PNP groups, and Microsoft embedded has been this new thing lately, and I've been playing with it. You can actually do a REST call it acts like a document library. So you can use REST or Postman to go and put files in and get files out, and it just stores it in your tenant. But basically, it acts like a document library. And this is how to go into the admin center and get your admin center configured for it. So there's some work there to get that set up. Really interesting. I've been playing with it on my dev tenant. So I think Microsoft, it's going to be interesting if they become more of the back-end data storage. I wonder if this is just a hidden SharePoint site. I don't know. But it acts like document libraries. So that's a new feature coming out. So Microsoft Viva as well. I don't know a lot about Viva. I thought I would throw this in because it's another rollout coming in March. This is another one, right? Are you familiar with this one, Dimitri, at all?
Yes, this is a new feature.
Yeah. And that's it for my updates. I got them really short today. Huge thank you for Turn Digital for providing the food and the event today and helping organize the room. So big thank you. The main event is how I leverage Copilot for Microsoft 365 as a business owner in Dimitri.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you everyone for coming out. Before I get started, I would like to see a quick show of hands, both in person as well as online. Who is using Copilot for 365 today? All right, about 50-50 in the room. I see a few hands online as well. Perfect. So for those that are already using it, I think you might pick up a new trick or two that could be helpful. For those that are not yet using it, this could be a little bit more interactive, a little bit more of seeing what it is actually hands-on and maybe how this could be beneficial to your organization. So to jump right into this, my name is Dimitri Arapetov. I am a partner at Turn Digital. I've been working with SharePoint and related technologies for a very, very long time. And we've really seen it evolve to where we are today. My background is mostly with Microsoft 365 and Azure. So anything related to M365 and many things related to Azure, I could probably give you a hand with. And I've really been an early adopter of generative AI. ChatGPT has really put a big flashlight on this whole area of AI improvement. And it's only been exponentially growing ever since. And like any other early adopter of any technology, it's, you suffer a bit through the pain, but you come out on the other end with a much better understanding. Last but not least, I also helped co-found this user group along with Mike Dixon and several others that are no longer part of the group about 10 years ago. So this May will be our 10-year anniversary. So thanks to all that have been with us since the early days, and we also welcome many new faces. All right, so for today's agenda, we'll start with just recapping what is Copilot. And if anyone in this room thinks they have an answer, we can disagree on that. We'll talk a bit in terms of how it works. And most of today's session will really be demos, just to give you the hands-on experience of how this all comes together. I do have a few additional resources at the end for continuing and getting started, and then we'll wrap it up with the Q&A. As we go through this, because a lot of this is very contextual and really in time, feel free to ask questions as we progress, because going back and kind of answering a question like 6 screens ago might be a little bit difficult because this is a very iterative demo where things build on top of each other. And for those that are online, if you want to raise your hand, we have Bill and Mike in the room, keeping an eye on here as well. All right, so let's dive in. So what is Copilot? So Copilot is a lot of things. On this slide, you're going to see some of the things that Copilot is. There's many more. There's no one official list anywhere. So these are some of the aspects that I've scraped through Microsoft documentations and blog posts. And as you can see here, there's no one definition. There's many products that are going to be under this umbrella. I think some of the more important ones that I want to cover and really dig a little bit more into today is the very first one up here, which used to be called Bing Chat Enterprise when it was released a few months ago. Now it is called just Copilot. So if somebody says just Microsoft Copilot, there is a specific product called just Copilot, which is this new chat experience that I'll show you as part of my demos today. The next thing that we're going to cover today is the Copilot for Microsoft 365. And as you can see here, there's a lot of different Copilots within this division. We shouldn't think of Copilot as being one overall product. Like, we don't think of SharePoint as being one product. There's different features and different functionalities within it. And just like Excel Copilot is going to be similar to Word Copilot, but it's going to be different. It's going to have different functionality, different use cases that you would leverage it within the context of where you're working. Same thing applies for many of these other Copilots. Some of these Copilots are bundled within your existing license SKUs, like that very first one, Microsoft Copilot up in the top left corner. If you have a Microsoft Enterprise SKU or a Business Premium SKU, chances are you already have this included as a part of your bundle. If not, there's a small upcharge for it. Some of these other ones, such as like Copilot for Power Automate, that's included as long as you have a Power Automate enabled license, which is just about every SKU that Microsoft has. They don't charge you extra for that. And then you have things like Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is a $30 a month add-on license on top of your existing M365 subscription. I'm not going to go into the pricing during today's presentation. That's really not the purpose. But just keep in mind that Copilot means a lot of different things depending on which app you're inside of. And that means not just functionality, but also licensing and how this all comes together. So moving forward, let's talk about a bit of the Copilot for Microsoft 365 architecture. And there's a lot to unravel in this diagram for Microsoft, but I'm going to do my best to walk you through exactly how this all comes together. So we're going to start here in the top left corner where we have a prompt coming in. So this prompt can be from any of these applications within Microsoft 365 that I've just shown. And the first thing that happens is the prompt goes into this Copilot service. And before Microsoft takes your request, your prompt, and sends it to the large language model, the first thing it does is it takes this information and it does a concept called grounding. So if we think of the LLM, the large language model on the right here, think of it as like a small kiosk storefront to a ginormous, IKEA-sized library with 1 million worker bees in there. As soon as you walk into a large language model, you give it a piece of information. And they'll take your information and they'll combine that with their wealth of knowledge and they'll give you an answer. But that wealth of knowledge is not tied into your data. That wealth of knowledge is not tied into the internet, the live internet, and it's tied to whatever they have on their bookshelves. And with that, they can interpret information, give you back results, summarize things. But if you really want to give it context to say, okay, show me, my Q1 budget for this year, you need to basically give it your presentations, your spreadsheets, and say, hey, this is my Q1 data. Now answer these questions on top of it for me. So this whole concept of grabbing this additional context to give into this kind of kiosk model is what grounding means. So when we look at grounding, there's two really areas of grounding. So one is it could be plugins, meaning connections to other line of business applications that you've built or you've bought off the shelf, things like ServiceNow and Confluence and other data sets that you might have. This could be Bing search, like, who won the Super Bowl last month or last week. This would be information that would come out to the public web. There could be corporate data that would come through the Microsoft Graph. So this would be things like, who you are, or if your prompt's related to calendaring, it can take the context of who you are as a user, apply that to the graph, and bring back what it believes is relevant information to your question, and then present this conglomerate of data into this large language model and say, here's some things that might be useful for context. Can you answer this prompt? And therefore, if the prompt is just to say, summarize this document, then a lot of these other things might not be as critical, might not add as much value. But if your prompt is really something that ties back to a piece of information that the large language model likely would not have, then this is where you fundamentally get an experience that ChatGPT cannot offer you today, right? Because ChatGPT is very much strictly, you give a prompt, it goes into the LLM, you get a response back, right? With this additional grounding is where the power of Copilot really starts to differentiate. So within here, we're getting our grounding information. Part 3, we're coming back to Copilot. And now Copilot takes this grounding information, sends it to the LLM. Within the LLM, you have the large language model, and then you have the responsible AI elements here as well. So responsible AI is Microsoft's entire push to make sure that you're not using this for evil, right? You're not using this to slander and write awful things about people. You're not using this for politically motivated reasons. There's a whole concept, and there's a lot of detail that Microsoft publishes about responsible AI. But the idea is that this could be a very dangerous tool if placed in the wrong hands without any kind of safeguards. So whatever you see here, you're going to have a hard time tricking it to actually doing something that Microsoft deems to be inappropriate. Okay, so now that we have this information here, there's a prompt that is a response that's generated. This response is now fed back into this compliance center through Microsoft Purview for additional processing. So maybe you asked it a very unique question to give me back all of my social security numbers for all my Boston-based employees. And maybe because you have an HR hat on and you have access to employment documents, it was able to assemble that for you through the grounding and then give it back to you. But maybe you have a DLP policy that says, you know what, this is really not something that we should be, sharing and surfacing up. So that's where that can filter the content and really add restrictions to it, right? Or maybe it gets labeled with internal use only, or in the context of like, let's say I'm using Copilot just by myself in Word, I could get a very different response than if I'm using a Copilot as an additional chat member to a group chat. Because when you're using Copilot in a group chat setting in Teams, for example, it's going to take the least common denominator with everyone that's in that environment. So this all comes together, and then ultimately you get the output coming back to whichever application called it, right? Whether it's the Power Virtual Agent, which they've renamed recently, whether it's back to Word, back into Outlook, whichever the caller was of this information. I know this is a lot. I'll pause here for 1 second. Are there any questions so far?
So if you're in a Teams meeting with everybody else from HR, you could probably use some HR related data, but if one person's not, then what was the denominator that would take that away?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So that grounding would make sure that people that don't natively have access to the data, that data set can't be used as part of the grounding to be able to go and feed a large language model. And I know we're talking about just access in the basic sense of, SharePoint content or, content within your enterprise. This also applies for sensitivity labels of content being assigned, right? So even if I have a file to an HR site that I have access to the HR site, but maybe that sensitivity label on that document prevents me from having access into it, it'll take all of that into account to make sure that it won't show me that information. All right, so moving forward. So we've prepared a few different demos today. And being an owner of a business, there's a lot of different hats that you wear. Sometimes there's multiple hats within a given 30-minute window. And ultimately, any kind of tools that we could use to really help us out, even if it saves 5 or 10 minutes for a given task, if you're doing hundreds of tasks a day, that's a pretty big outcome at the end of the day. So I've taken a few scenarios here. And as a full disclaimer, we've been part of the Content AI program for over a year now. We've seen a lot of the things in demos. We've learned a lot of the things over the year. We haven't gotten our hands on it ourselves until Microsoft reduced the minimum threshold from 300 down to 1. Right? Because previously you had to commit to spending over 100K in licenses, and as a 100-person company, that didn't really make sense to us. But ever since this has been released, we have got our hands on it, and we've really tried to incorporate this as part of our day-to-day life. And a lot of this is not so much like, okay, well, I'm going to look at the outside and I'm really comfortable doing things using search and filtering and whatever else, however you get your job done today, show me why it's valuable enough to cross it and try this new technology, and then I'll consider the switch, right? That's kind of like a very, change hesitant way of looking at it. The way that I'm looking at it, that I encourage others, is to say, okay, it's very clear that this is going to be the future. This is going to be the next big, revolution that's happening in the, computer space. Let's dive all in and figure out what works and what doesn't work. All of these things are still very new. There's still a lot of things that people are figuring out, right? I know today's session was really focused around, okay, let me show you some things that I've figured out myself over the last, 6 weeks or so of using this, and hopefully this can spark some ideas, or maybe you could use them for the same scenarios. But there's probably thousands of other ideas that no one's even thought of yet. And until you're really fully in, you're not going to be able to know what they are, right? So as I go through this, you might see some things you're like, oh, well, but I could do this using search, or oh, I could do this using some other way. The purpose isn't to say this is the best way, end all be all way of doing it, but this is ways that I'm starting to use it, which sparks new ideas. Question.
I'm sorry, but to go back a couple of slides, the Copilot for Enterprise, are there requirements for that other than having a Microsoft 365 license? Because I've noticed that that's available in some of my tenants, but not all of my tenants.
Yeah, so there's specific SKUs that are required. I believe it's bundled in with M365 E3, M365 E5, Business Premium, and I want to say there was one other SKU. And if you don't have one of those SKUs, then I think it's like $5 a user a month to add that on.
Okay.
And again, I'm not talking about the Microsoft one. I'm talking about the one here in the top left corner, which was previously called Bing Chat Enterprise.
Right, but there's a big difference between if you use that logged in or logged out.
Correct. If you're logged out, you're just getting the consumer version of GPT, and there's no, and just like the consumer version of ChatGPT, your data could be used potentially. I'm not sure. I'm not too familiar with the consumer side of Microsoft, but on the enterprise side, your data is definitely within the walls of your garden of your tenant.
Dimitri, you're correct on that.
All right, thank you, Dave. And I see Chris in the chat mentioned Bring to Enterprise is coming to more standard this year. Thank you, Chris.
Dimitri,
Yes.
so if, let's say you have a big company, but you want to buy only 10 licenses to start with, can you hand those licenses around to different people, or do they have to be fixed?
Great question. So for those online, the question is, if we buy, a dozen licenses, can we pass them around employees, or does it have to be named individuals? So technically, this behaves like any other license that you would have for Visio project, where you could reassign it, 10 times a day if you so choose to. But Microsoft's vision of Copilot is really not for this to be like an application that you go and use. It's intended to be more like a personal assistant. So over time, it's going to learn how you write emails, how you respond to emails, how you, are you more direct? Are you more conversational? Do you, respond back with bullet points, or do you write paragraphs? So it's going to learn how you behave over time. So if you keep taking licenses away from people, chances are you're not going to get that full-fledged experience for the person that does have that license assigned. But from a piloting perspective, it's fully understood. You might not be ready to make the investment for your entire team. Maybe you want to run a small pilot. Maybe you want to give a few people a chance to interact with it. But the value with a lot of these AI products in general is that it gets better over time the more that you use it, because it learns more about you. So at the end of the day, going back to my kind of kiosk example with, million worker bees and a huge warehouse of data behind it, if you come there 10 times to the same kiosk and ask the same question, you'll probably get 10 different answers, because you're going to have a different person or, worker bee working on it, coming back with information. So it's going to be hard for you to really judge, how well or how bad it's performing until you're actually using it for real purposes and you're giving it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Good questions. All right, so let's jump over to our demos. Okay, so I'm gonna, and I'll be fully honest, the hardest part of preparing these demos was really coming up with real lifelike fake scenarios, meaning fake emails, fake conversations, and so forth. You'll see a bit of what I mean as we go through this. But okay, so the first thing I want to say is I'm wearing my sales hat, and we just received a submission through our website inviting us to go and participate in a SharePoint RFP. This is a typical HubSpot email. We're actually transitioning to Dynamics, but I use HubSpot for today's demo. So this comes in, and I don't know much about this company, Interurban Transit Partnership. I just see their name, and they want to know if we'd be interested in participating in an RFP file. So one of the things that I could do right away is I can grab the name of this company. I can go head over to my Bing Chat Enterprise. And because I have a license of M365 Copilot, I have these two options at the very top of my Bing Chat Enterprise, or sorry, Microsoft Copilot. And I'm not sharing my full screen. Apologies there. Right, there we go. So this was the HubSpot notification email that came in based on that form on our website. So, so to learn a little bit more about the company, I'm going to come into Microsoft Copilot. And because I'm licensed here at the top, I have two options, and I can choose whether I want my responses to be grounded in either my corporate data set. So I click on the Work tab, or if I want this to be grounded on the Bing public internet search results, which is where I would select web. In this case, I want to learn about what this company does. So I'm going to come into the web. I'm going to say, tell me about Interurban Transit Partnership. So while Copilot does this thing, full transparency, this is not a real client of ours. We just found an RFP online that looked related to SharePoint that's public. We grabbed it. The RFP is actually from 2018 or so. So everything here is fictional. So the idea here is that I'm asking a question, and sure, I can Google it and I can spend 5 minutes kind of clicking around, reading a little bit more about their Wikipedia. But this is giving me a pretty good summary of, who they are and what they do. So right off the bat, I understand that they're a public transit operator. Looks like they have some public funding that they recently received. Looks like they are, they have a decent amount of ridership every week. So it kind of gives me an idea of the sense of, is this an organization that we may want to work with or not? I can also come in here and say, show me recent news about company. And, a lot of times there might be something in the news that prompts these types of RFPs, right? Like the company might have a security incident and realize, okay, we need to get a better control on our environment. Or somebody might just get a grant to go and, migrate off of a legacy system and boom, this comes up. So this gives me, a bit of an idea. And, it's not perfect. Like, for example, here it's just reiterating. Show me news on. Perfect.
Sorry, can you show us again how you got to this page?
Yes, I just went to bing.com/chat. And if I was using the Edge browser, there's also a Copilot button in the Edge browser in the top right corner. I could click that and it would pop it up right in context of any page that I'm on. Okay, so this information, let's say, this looks good enough, we want to go ahead and we want to participate in this RFP. So I'm going to go over there, send them an email and come back and, they send me an RFP document. I open the RFP and I'm, not thrilled that it's 82 pages long. That's a long RFP. And for anyone that's worked with RFPs before, this takes hours to really comb through the details, figure out what they're looking for, figure out what format you need to respond in. It's not that great. So what I do in this case, using my Acrobat tool, I just export it into a Word file. And now I have a Word file version. Because now it's in Word, I can now use Copilot to go and ask questions about it and get a little more insight. So I click on my Copilot button here in the top right corner in Word. One thing I want to mention is that for some of these Copilots within the different Office applications, the file itself needs to reside inside of SharePoint or OneDrive for it to work. Not in every use case, but for some use cases it's required. So as a habit, I've just made sure that if I'm ever like downloading a file or whatever, I make sure I put it into a folder in my OneDrive just to make that a little bit easier. The other part I want to mention is that if you're ever going to want to refer to other files within Copilot, so in other words, if I want to, in a minute here, I'll show you, I'll go and tell you, draft me a response to this. That file needs to be part of the Microsoft 365 index. So if you're just dropping a file in, you might not be able to refer to it in Copilot immediately. It might be a bit of a gap, anywhere from 15 minutes to a few hours to be able to go and do that.
We have one question online. Is it either or, work, web, or if you do work, it surfaces the web also?
Yeah, great question. So within the bing.com/chat, it is you have to pick one of the two that you want. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because when you're, Bing Chat doesn't have the kind of the M365 Copilot, grounding engine behind it. So it's going to basically ask you, okay, am I looking at your, corporate data or am I looking at internet data? Whereas if you use M365 Copilot, that has a lot more of that grounding logic built in that knows to look at the Graph API, that knows to look at other areas, and that helps make some of those decisions on your behalf. Of course, using prompt engineering, using M365 Copilot, you can force it to only look at certain data sets when doing the routing. Great question.
Sorry, what's prompt engineering?
Great question. So
How long do you have?
yeah, so I might table that question until the end, but just to give you a very short answer, the value of the output of any of these large language models is only going to be as good as the input that you give it. So like if you go on, Google search and the basic example and you type in, TV, you might get results about, buying a TV, reviews, people complaining about fixing TVs, et cetera, right? But if you give it a nice query that specifies what you're looking for, you get a much better response. Now, that's the kind of like, you have a line of text there. This is more like, okay, now we have a lot more that we can do. And I'll show you a bit of that as we go through the demo.
So one follow-up
Yep.
on that. So I thought today I asked a great prompt question in Word, and it gave me a great answer, but I couldn't get back to the prompt to figure out what I had asked.
So usually you could scroll up if it's inside Word. And it might cut you off after, a certain number of characters. Yeah, I don't think I have a good answer for you on that one.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a history that's being maintained. Now, if you're using, let's say, Copilot in Teams, then within Teams, there is the ability to kind of go scroll up further and see like what you've chatted with previously. But inside of Word, I think once it cuts off, it's cut off. I think there's another question that came up here from Lisa. Use Copilot to generate fake scenarios for demoing Copilot. It's funny you say that because yes, in one of my upcoming demos, I did create fake content using Copilot to show how Copilot works for summarizing the fake data. Okay, so we have this proposal, right? Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to come here and say, summarize this document into 10 bullet points, right? It's an 83 somewhat page document. I don't want to read a one-page summary of it. Just give me the key points, right? Now, the larger the file is that you're asking for it to perform work on, like to summarize, for example, the longer it's going to take. And it's not going to take hours, but it might take a minute or two, especially if it has to go through and basically deconstruct the entire structure of it, what's important, what's not important, what's repeated, however things mentioned. So we'll give this a minute here to finish up. But yeah, here we go. So the other nice part is that it starts outputting the results as it's being generated. So it's not that you have to wait for all 10 bullet points to be analyzed and presented. So here we go. It tells us the scope of this document is that there's SharePoint implementation planning, development, and project consulting. This is the background. They have a 2016 server and they want to use it as a secure corporate intranet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So right off the bat, this gives me an idea. Is this something that falls into our wheelhouse? If they come back and they said, we want to migrate from SharePoint onto Confluence, then right off the bat, I realized this is probably not a good project for us. So perfect. I love it. And I'm going to close this document for now. I'm going to move on to my next example. So, okay, we want to work on this RFP. I'm going to fire up Word here. And within here, I'm going to say, draft a high quality 5-page response to this RFP. And I'm going to reference the file and I can start typing in SharePoint RFP. So one thing I've learned is that if you're using this reference a file feature inside of Word, you basically have to start typing and it's going to give you up to 3 search results and try to guess what file you want. If you do this in Word Online, it actually lets you browse to the file. So if it hasn't fully indexed the file yet, it makes it a little bit easier. All right, so I'm going to click this and I'm going to click generate. Now I'm asking it to basically go ahead and read these 82 pages and then generate 5 pages worth of content as a response to this RFP file. Now, typically, if I assign that to an employee to go work on, that's a solid, 2 to 3 days of work, researching, refining, looking forward at this. But here we go. As I'm sitting back and taking a sip of coffee, it's starting to draft backgrounds and objectives. It's starting to go through and coordinate other aspects. Now, what else I could do is I could also give it another example of a previous RFP response that we've conducted and say, follow a similar template, similar sections, and it'll do that for us. But as we go through, it's writing the response.
Can you elaborate on what you just said there? Because that's actually probably my favorite feature here. So in the prompt, would you just say, write this, do it, and do it in the model of this other example?
Yeah, here, I'll give you an example. So let's come back to new document. Let's say 5-page high quality response to this RFP. / brings this up. Next is SharePoint RFP. Using the following as a template reference.
Nice. Okay.
So let's go ahead.
So yeah, that works exactly how I imagined it would. That's fantastic.
And we're using natural language here, right? So I could probably word that 40 different ways. And what you're going to learn as you work with these AI models is that how you word it could actually influence the outcome.
Yes.
And, I try to keep some notes for what's worked well and what hasn't. Maybe someday later this year, I'll actually publish it out. But
And that, by the way, is prompt engineering. He's
We
describing
have,
that.
Neve online has his hand raised because of a question.
Yeah, just a quick one. So one of the things up here in Canada, I'm working on a global scale. And I find that different protocols for how you speak with people or how you actually write documents depends on what country or what person you're speaking with. And I guess what you're showing us is that if you have a document, you can kind of resource that you can actually get to that. Because I know that when I'm dealing with someone from DACA, if I have a request, I'm probably going to ask, could you kindly do this? But if I'm dealing with someone from the US, it could be a little bit more straightforward. Hey, I need this done by this date. There's so many protocols in different countries about how you're supposed to ask a question of somebody. And do you find that using that kind of documentation makes it easier to handle that?
I haven't tried anything along these lines yet, but it sounds fascinating. I would presume if you supplied, as part of the grounding material, if you specified the writing style or writing samples, that it would be able to go ahead and do that for you. I mean, going back to even like the earlier ChatGPT examples, like someone says, respond to this question like a pirate. And there's like, R's all over the response, or rewrite this on a 5th grade reading level, right?
Respond as a
Right.
Canadian.
Respond as
As
a
a
Canadian.
Yeah, you gotta have A at the end of every sentence.
I mean, like, for example, like, I can highlight a piece of text here and I can give it some feedback. But keep it for what it's done for me so far. I'll give it a second to reset here. But yes, I do have the ability to come in here and say basically like rewrite with Copilot. And it's gonna give me another example. It's gonna, give me another example, and I can come in here and I can have some settings. So I can say, do I want the tone to be neutral, professional, casual, imaginative, concise, and give it some additional guidance for how I want it to be. So maybe I want to make this a little bit more casual, seem a little bit more friendly. I could regenerate it. It's going to give me some examples, and I could either replace it or I could tell it to try again, and basically go ahead and run it through the model again, give me something a little bit different.
Yeah, I think as the system becomes much more sophisticated, learns more, I mean, we don't want to have a homogeneous example of this is how you're supposed to speak or send an email specifically to every person in every country, because every country has a different way of doing things or accepting how you're asking or how you're actually presenting what you're giving them. And I think if we can get to that point a little bit more granular on that side with this, then it's going to become much more effective for that kind of correction.
Yeah. So from what I've seen or what I've read and so forth, the Copilot for Outlook in particular is really training to use your voice when it drafts responses. But that being said, if your voice is different depending on who you're speaking with in your audience, I'm not sure if it has that native detection capability as part of its core functionality.
Sure.
But to your point, you mean grounding it with examples? I think it should work. I think it's worth a try.
Yeah, I think that's the direction we need to eventually head to. I'm surprised, I was reading a BBC article, not realizing that it was BBC Pidgin English. And I'm going, oh, this must be AI. There's a horrible, way of presenting English. And then I realized it's an actual specific way of presenting English so Nigerians can understand it. Because that's the way in Nigeria that English is presented or spoken. And I'm like, it kind of opened my eyes to like, yeah, it's the same thing with this. We need to make sure when we're communicating and we're communicating with different communities around the world, that we're cognizant of how they speak, how they formally actually talk to each other. So I think it's going to take a little time, but I think we'll get there with this.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So I see Chris has a question in the chat. Have we tried reformatting things using Copilot? I've had various levels of success, from it saying it did it, but it didn't actually do anything, versus it actually doing a somewhat decent job. Like in this case, if I want to visualize it's a table, let's see what it comes up with. I'm gonna pull up the chat here on my phone so I can compare this as well. So like here we go, like, you know, it broke out the phases, it broke out the tasks, the descriptions. I think it did a decent job for what we asked it to do. But in terms of saying, you know, change the color to blue, I have a feeling it's not gonna work. Yeah. Didn't do that. So yeah, I mean, Chris, to your point, I don't think all of the formatting stuff is fully polished off yet. Question from Marcel, could we use Copilot on our phone? That's a good question. I have not tried that yet.
Yes, it is possible.
There's an app for that.
All right, perfect. Think so?
Do you know the name?
So there's the Copilot app, like the Bing chat equivalent.
Yeah.
That's there. But in terms of like, can you use Copilot in Word on your phone? I'm not sure. All right, so continuing to move on here. Okay, so basically it drafted this 5-page response like I requested for it to do. And of course, this is not something that you would ever go ahead and just submit as a response. But this could at least put some structure in place, right? It could put some of those languages in place. And it gives you the ability to come in here and refine it further, you know, paste in additional information from other, you know, boilerplate language, like, you know, tell us about your company, tell us about your history, what projects you've done along these lines. So overall, I think it's pretty cool. So I'm gonna save this file. I'm gonna call this file, you know, RFP response. Live demo. And let's say we submit this response and, you know, they use ChatGPT to summarize it and realize it matches what they're looking for. And now they invite us in to come and do a presentation on it. So I can open up PowerPoint and I can ask it to actually go ahead and build me a presentation based on the document. So I can come into Copilot here. I can say create a presentation from a file. And if for some reason this wasn't working on my desktop edition recently, but it was working online, so I'm gonna pull up PowerPoint online. And let's just say the file is RFP response live demo. Okay, so the one that we just created has not been indexed yet, but I do have an easy bake oven where I have pre-created this earlier. Same source RFP, same tools used to generate it. I'm sure the language is be slightly different, but it's going ahead and it's generating a presentation from those 5 pages that I had ChatGPT summarize for me. Rather, not summarize, but prepare the response from. As you see here, it's going to create the outline at the top first. And another thing that you'll notice across the board here is that whenever you're interacting with this GPT service, you're going to see this thumbs up and thumbs down constantly appearing. And this is Microsoft's feedback loop, so that if something goes well, they want to know about it. If something doesn't go well, they want to know about it as well. And this is going to help train the model. So over time, as you're using it, they understand how happy or unhappy you are with it. But also, they're going to see on a broad scale, you know, what needs to be done from larger scale fine tuning. So we're at 92% here. Also generating speaker notes, which is nice because sometimes you have some great content on a slide and you need a source or you need something else behind it. So here we go. We have an RFP response full of color, talking about different things, maybe a little too much words on a given page for my liking, but I can come over here into a designer and I can click on some other designs and basically use Microsoft's catalog of stock photos to create these types of slides on the fly. And again, if you take a presentation or an RFP response and you have to create a PowerPoint behind it, this could also take hours. You saw here in the last 10 minutes or so, we not only created an RFP draft response, but also a PowerPoint reflecting how to present it. And to me, this is very cool. So I don't know, we were talking a little bit earlier, over by the food in terms of like the value of Copilot, right? Now, imagine if you needed to have an assistant next to you, right? You hired someone that's, just out of high school, just out of college to go and do all of these things that you're doing with Copilot. You're probably paying them at least, $20, $30 an hour is my guess. This is $30 a month. And it's unlimited stuff. And it works at 3 a.m. if that's when you're awake, trying to get the submission done on time. So to me, this adds a tremendous amount of value, especially if you're able to take advantage of it in these types of use cases. So this is the end of demo 1. I'll pause here for any questions. I know there's some good chatter throughout. All right, let's keep rolling to demo number 2. Okay, so demo number 2 is related to joining a sales prospecting call, right? So someone reaches out to you through a referral, through your website, and you want to join a call just to learn a little bit more about the project. You want to understand, is this something that's going to be a good fit for what we offer? And I'm going to pause my screen sharing here just for a second so I can pull up that Teams meeting that I used Copilot to make my life easier with. Okay, so this was also this is all mock data. So we had a call with the company just to learn a little bit more about what they're looking for. We have the recording of it. We have the transcriptions of it. And here we see a full transcription. They're talking to us about a box migration. So right within this context, I can have Copilot answer questions on it, or I could download the transcript and open it up in a Word file. And I tend to prefer to open it in a Word file, especially if I'm going to take actions on this after I'm done with it. Because as great as it is to be able to go back into my calendar and find that exact meeting that I was part of, a lot of times it's better just to attach it to the deal in your CRM system. So here we go. We have the transcript. It's going back and forth talking about, their box migration project. So we're going to come into Copilot. I'm going to say, summarize the meeting in 15 bullet points. And as for bullet points, just because that's my preferred style of communication, I think it cuts out some of the formalities and really gets into the meat of the conversation. So if I'm asking for a summary, bullets are typically my preferred way of interpreting it. So we'll give us a few seconds. So while I'm doing this, right, so what's going on? So it's understanding that there's a timestamp above each of these. And depending on how long the time is, it probably has some kind of input for, is this important or not? It has the name of the person that said what. And then it comes down to understanding what we talked about. So in here, talks about this, we talked about, customization, and they have some workflows that might need to be migrated. There's some timelines that we discussed, migration preferences. So within here, I can come back and I can say, what are the next steps? It'll go through and it'll recap, what did we come to? Who's going to do what? Am I going to be the one to go and do something? Are they going to go ahead and schedule a meeting? What will this final outcome look like? So while this is generating, got a question from Adam on the chat. How much hallucinations have you seen? Great question. So hallucinations, for those unfamiliar with the concept where the large language models can just make things up. They don't tell you they're making it up, but they could just make it up. We've seen some of these things in the news, right? There was the famous lawsuit where an attorney used GPT to come up with a defense for why their arguments made sense, and it referenced a bunch of other lawsuits that use a similar kind of arguments, but those lawsuits never existed. They were all fake. Oh. So not only did GPT draft a full response, it also made up citations that sounded plausible. Now, the problem isn't that they use the AI technology to assist them, right? The problem is that they didn't verify the sources. And one nice thing with a lot of the Copilot 365 aspects is that you have these references available down here, right? So we can go back and we can check to see why does it think this is the right answer. And if it's something important, then yes, I will 100% go back and verify that, yes, this matches what's in the source information. So to your point, Adam, I haven't seen a whole lot of hallucinations. That being said, there are some prompt engineering examples of ways you could do things to actually avoid hallucinations, right? So like one classic example, reduce. So one classic example is that you ask a large language model something that it doesn't know the answer to, and it makes up an answer, right? And not because it says, you know, I don't want to be good to you. It's more like it didn't have an answer, so it found something to go back, right? So you can do something like such as, you know, it's okay to respond, you don't know if you don't know, and blah, blah, blah. But if you do have the answer, I would like to know. So you kind of have to like treat it like a toddler almost, you know, sometimes where you got to be a little careful with how you massage it. In my, 6 weeks or so of being hands-on with this, I haven't ran into any hallucinations. I think that's more luck than anything else. But that is 100% something that needs to be, a center of mind as you're going through this.
Given that the Copilot that you're using is fixed on the information set of documents within your tenant, do you feel that that lowers the possibility of hallucinations because of that? Because it's not accessing the entire World Wide Web and it's
Yes, so
conspiracy theories on Reddit, you know?
So I mean, and just for the clarity for those on the call, like hallucinations isn't that it's giving you the incorrect response, thinking that it's correct. Hallucinations is that it's making things up, right? So to answer your question, I think Microsoft puts a lot of work into that grounding, because when you enter a prompt into 365 Copilot, that's not the raw. Like Microsoft appends a ton of stuff to your prompt to actually not only complement the grounding data, but also basically massage it in a way that's going to give you a better response. Right? So that's part of what the 365 Copilot engine does. So I think they've been doing a good job with it. And to answer your question, if I don't have a forecast for Q4 of 2024 and I ask Copilot to give me numbers, will it do it? Will it make it up? Like, I don't know. I haven't really tried to find the breaking points around hallucinations, to be honest. But it's a great thing. I mean, I think in the coming, 6 to 12 months, we're going to see a ton more coming out for people that are starting to find what those perimeter and edge cases really are. And I think as a community as a whole, we're all going to benefit from it.
I'd like to believe that the smaller the data set you feed a model like this, the more accurate and concise it can be. But I haven't had the experience to test that out thoroughly.
Yeah.
So I was curious what your experience has been.
It's important that you actually have governances and best practices in place when you bring AI into your workplace. Before Staples actually started their Copilot program, as well as using Bing Enterprise Chat, etc.
Yeah.
We actually had a governance in place, and one of the do's and don'ts of using AI, one of the biggest ones was make sure that you double check, because of the fact there are hallucinations. You over time will definitely come across and have to deal with those hallucinations, and you will be held responsible for those hallucinations if you claim them as fact.
100%.
Good call. Thanks, Dave.
So just tying back to the value of this aspect, usually for many years when I was in a sales prospecting call, I would be spending a lot of time writing notes, right? Typing up information as we went along. And sometimes that's a little distracting if you're trying to maintain a conversation. And especially if the video camera's on, right? Because it looks like you're just like doing email or doing something else on the side when you're really just taking notes. So I think being able to turn on this kind of transcription and summarization feature really allows me to focus more on the conversation and not so much worry about, oh, am I capturing the correct notes? Oh, someone just introduced themselves. Did I spell their name correct? Like all those like little things that are micro distractions really get to take the back burner because you have this tool available in front of you.
You have a question online from Steve?
Yeah, just so I've been playing around with Copilot Studio for a bit, and in my company I've created a SharePoint site that is designed to help the engineers advance their career. So what courses do they need to make it to the next level? So what I did is I created a chat bot that is connected specifically to that SharePoint site, connected to 4 websites where the courses that they can use exist, and then to 4 document pages that are based on what the criteria are for them to advance in Excel files. That's it. That's, keeping it a very closed world. And for the most part, it's been pretty accurate, but every now and then there's a hallucination. For example, I asked the question, what do I need to do? What courses do I need to take to become an ASE? And it gave the correct courses, but it labeled the ASE program as the automotive service engineer, like not even close. So, you wonder where it gets that information from, or where it came up with that, because I'm really keeping it very detailed to just the specific the SharePoint site, just these specific websites. So it's just fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with prompt engineering, there's different ways to basically tell it to only look at this data set. And I would suggest maybe just playing with that a little bit and seeing if you can fine tune your prompt so that it knows to not look anywhere else. Sometimes you have to be explicit, look at this file and only this file to generate your response, and seeing how that comes back with.
Yeah, 2 other questions online.
Thanks.
Yes.
Okay, question from Sandra. So from a governance perspective, with high quality metadata and enterprise search prevent AI hallucinations? So hallucinations, I think, are just a natural side effect of large language models. However, when you look at the slide that I had earlier when we talked about grounding, let me just jump back to here, right? So when we talked about Microsoft applying grounding, part of what Microsoft is doing is firing off your query over into the Graph API and the Graph search model and come back with what is relevant information so that I could supply that to the large language model to be considered. And I think having high quality metadata and tagging, labeling, and so forth will 100% improve the quality of what comes back from the graph so that the grounding becomes better, so your overall responses will be better coming out of the large language model. And Chris mentioned you can also ask Copilot how it can derive the responses, right? Okay, so moving forward to the next demo, right? So the next demo, I'm putting on my marketing hat, right? And we all know that one of the best ways to drive traffic to your website is to have ongoing blog posts, updates, something that Google sees your website is active, and ranks you higher to websites that haven't changed. So with that, my marketing team wants me to write at least 1 blog post a week just on some topic. And I'm not a very creative person. Like, I know how to use Photoshop. I can't design something, like it's just not in my DNA. With that being said, I could use Copilot to help me get started, right? So for example, say write a 4-paragraph blog post on benefits of working from home, right? So maybe I want to do a blog post that says, Microsoft 365 really enables you to be effective working from home as well as in the office with all of the collaboration features. So I just type in this very basic prompt and there you go. It's going to start generating a 4-paragraph blog post that I could then fine tune, edit, insert the flavor of M365 that I'm most familiar with, and really, make my life a lot easier. Occasionally, you will get this message that comes up where something came wrong. One thing I've learned is that there's a lot of API calls that occur when you're using Copilot. So if you're on a shaky network connection, it's not going to work very well. This network connection I have no control over, so I'm not sure if that's the cause or something else is causing it. But usually there's the ability to try it again or click generate again. It'll fire off and attempt to do this again. So
Dimitri, one of the other things that I found is it times out, especially in Office products. The session will time out within like 5 minutes if you don't use it exclusively or continuously.
If it is timed out, how do you time it back in?
You just literally tell it to regenerate and it'll wake it back up again.
The nice thing is that once you enter a prompt, if it fails for whatever reason, the prompt doesn't disappear. It stays in that box, so you just hit the button again. But here you go. Quick 4-paragraph blog post that would probably take me 3 hours to write because I spend too much time overthinking it and drafting and rewriting and trying to formulate how to structure it all together. So again, very useful there. Okay, I'm gonna go to another example. So, we're starting our trade show season with the Microsoft 365 conference that's happening down in Orlando at the end of March or end of April, sometime around there. We have a number of other trade shows that we're planning for this year, and every year we try to do something a little bit different to gain interest into our booth. Last year we had like the spin the wheel thing with raffle prizes, and sometimes we like to switch it up. So one thing that we could do is we could make sure we're in the web context and say I'm going to provide raffle ideas for trade shows. And I've tried, I've Googled this before, and you hit a blog post, it's like 90% full of ads. You scroll through like one line of text, and then you go on to the next result, and they tell you the history of trade shows. And so this really gives me the answers of what I'm looking for, right? So here's a good thing. Okay, so they're throwing out ideas for us. And again, it's not that we couldn't do this otherwise. It might just take a little bit longer if we had to go and manually scrape websites and kind of correlate these ideas. And in doing so, this is great for brainstorming, right? Because we can, change the prompt, right? So, ideas for trade show, raffle prizes, in Boston. So again, really nice tool to use for brainstorming, and especially if you're let's say you're in a meeting with your marketing team and there's a collective brainstorming situation. Somebody pulls one of this up and it helps drive ideas that could feed off each other and could evolve. So this is actually one that I personally used this week because we're starting to figure out things that we need to order for the upcoming shows. Okay.
Great for marketing.
So let's go on to the next demo, which is around performance reviews. Everyone's favorite part of the year. All right. So in this scenario, I have a 360 performance review from John Smith. So this is a fictitious employee where their peers, their supervisors, their direct reports have all submitted feedback on what they do well, where there's areas for improvement. And the first person was very structured and gave me nice sections, and then the next person just typed up some bullet points in their code editor, and the third one followed a similar pattern. And this role is the role of a developer, so I don't really want to read all of every detail. So let's see how I can help use Copilot to get me there. So here I'm going to say provide me the top 3 trends. All right. So as you think of this example, think of things like company-wide surveys, right? So if we send a company-wide survey, we just launched an intranet, what's your feedback? We're 30 days into it now. A lot of times people would write a lot of information, and the easiest way to really sample the data was to create word clouds, right? So which word appeared the most, and those are the bigger words, and whichever appeared less frequently was smaller in font. And while that's great, or a good indicator of what are some of those buzzwords, but someone might say good, great, tremendous. They all mean the same thing, but because they're different words, the word cloud treats them as separate objects, right? Using something like this where you can summarize the feedback, you might be able to actually get really good, concise summaries of what are the most important things that are being discussed without having to go through and read hundreds of entries one by one. So here we go. So here's the main ideas, right? Strengths. I asked for strengths and areas of improvement, and they gave me strengths, areas of improvement, and recommendations. So along with reference points for each of these for why it's referring to that. So the idea here is that I'm able to take this unstructured content sourced from 3 different individuals, all written in different formats, all using different ways of expressing their thoughts, and having Copilot understand what that means and provide that an output in a way that's concise and structured.
Question about what you just said, because it's a great use case you mentioned there. How would you go about doing something like that? Like if you had hundreds of files, could you just have it reference, instead of a single file, reference a folder or a document library and say, give me a summary of all of the documents in this?
Um,
And also, are there any caps to the amount of documents that you could do that to?
so if I'm not mistaken, there's a limit of 3 files per prompt. So behind the scenes, all of these prompts and all the grounding information gets converted into tokens. And those tokens are being applied into the large language models. So I know we're kind of like showing some like, black magic here, but behind under the scenes is the OpenAI APIs, and there's still limitations there. So the maximum token duration translates to, I believe, roughly 80 pages, give or take. So you really can't effectively summarize something that's more than 80 pages without chunking it out. Now, to answer your point, if you have, like, let's say, performance reviews that are usually less than a page long and you have a library full of them, you can use the word function to combine multiple Word files into one and then use that as a workaround. I'm sure in the future limits will be removed. I'm sure there's a lot of ways, but.
And that's why I was very curious what they were today, assuming that they would be changed in the near future.
My understanding is 3, but don't hold me to that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just doing a quick time check. All right, we have a few more we'll get through pretty quickly. Okay, so moving on to the next demo, I'm going to wear my operations hat. And I'm going to show you the ability for Outlook to summarize emails. Okay, so I'll set a little bit of context before I show this example. Long story short, we have a client that has a very old tenant, about 10 years old. And back in those days, if you had an old tenant, it would actually, I don't see Copilot loading. I'm going to actually refresh my Outlook session. I'll talk through this. So with the old versions of, well, not old, but the initial versions of SharePoint, if you went to go and create a portal site, right, meaning like a publishing portal, which you might do for an intranet, you might do for the classic publishing infrastructure, instead of giving you a managed path under /sites or /portals or /teams, it would actually give you a top level subdomain. So let's say your tenant was Microsoft.com and you created a publishing portal, it would be Microsoft-portal1.onmicrosoft.com or .sharepoint.com. And then the next portal you create would be the 2. And I think they did that so that you can have vanity domain names like you could with SharePoint on-prem, because you can't have vanity domain names with managed paths, right? It has to be the top level sites. But they got rid of that feature because it wasn't scalable. It had all sorts of issues. And the challenge they ran into this week is that all of those sites, they stopped working. And it was, it was kind of a fire drill because they still had a lot of content that was built off of those sites and they were functional. They didn't see a reason to invest time to move over to modern or to move off of those. So we opened a Microsoft ticket. We, used our Premier for Partners channel and we got it resolved the same day, right? It turns out some Azure AD app registration needed to be re-registered for some reason. And the context of this email was basically the exchange between, the client, my team, and Microsoft basically saying, why did this happen? And I'm going to reshare my screen here. Like, in other words, who went into the tenant and disabled it, right? So because I'm in Outlook, I have this button at the top here called Summary by Copilot. So right now, this only works for the new Outlook and the web version of Outlook. It is coming to the classic, the main version of Outlook in the next couple of months.
The working version.
So here we go, right? So if we look at the summary, and this is awesome because, as a manager, you're probably looped into emails that already have like 50 back and forths in it. And it takes a bit of time to go back, okay, what do they want? What do they want? Keeping a mental map of conversations that happened to date. So by clicking this button, just right here, right? Client reported an issue accessing the sites due to recent authentication changes, which caused a disruption for 72 hours. This was prior to us opening the ticket. So-and-so from Microsoft provided a PowerShell script to fix the issue. They fixed the issue, provided a lack of frustration. They provided more information. And we said it was unacceptable. So really quickly, within a matter of a few lines, we just summarized this entire email chain, including, granular PowerShell command lines and so forth, right? And I think something like this is very invaluable, especially if you are part of a lot of chains and you just don't have the time to keep up with them, right? Or if you get thrown in the mix after there's already been a lot of conversation. So I think this feature about like saves me a lot of time. Another, I see Chris is saying that's available. So Chris, it's on the roadmap for for March, I believe. If you're on targeted release, maybe you got it sooner. As of this morning, I didn't have that in my primary outlook. Yeah, I'm glad to hear it's rolling out. Okay, so let me give you another context here, right? So this is an internal email between my team, and we have a demo tenant that we use where we, anyone on our team that wants to have admin access can have admin access. And, we build stuff, we demo stuff, we do proof of concepts. And it's an older dev tenant, and therefore it didn't have the latest SKUs that were eligible to get Copilot added on top of it. And you actually couldn't buy Copilot in this classic version of a special dev tenant to begin with. So, we started exploring what are the options. If we get a new tenant, could we just apply the new SKUs back to this tenant? Or, so basically, one of my team members did some research on it, and they have what they believe is the path forward. I'm going to say, sounds good. We need to get this running ASAP as Copilot demos are piling up. So if once I draft this, if I come in here, we can get Copilot to help coach me, right? Coaching by Copilot. So it's going to come in here. Whoops, I guess I need to paste that into here. This is the web version of Outlook, so it's little. So what this is going to do, it's going to analyze the text that I'm writing and basically tell me how good I am with what I am writing. And sometimes it tells me I did a good job. Sometimes it tells me there's a lot to learn from.
Sometimes it ignores you.
Let me refresh. I think my session timed out. Look online if I'm being honest. Give me a second here. Here, coaching with Copilot. For some reason, it's not. All right, well, this demo we're going to skip over, but essentially, this gives us a pop-up and it says, here's the things that you didn't do good with. Like one, you didn't acknowledge what the previous person said and provide feedback on that. Like two, your tone is very direct. You might want to consider to change it to be more conversational. So it gives you this kind of feedback, and sometimes I'm a little too direct, and to the point someone had on the call earlier. Sometimes there's different communication styles that work better with different people. So I haven't, I've played with this a little bit. I think it's interesting. I think what's more interesting is that when it's going to start to kind of combine this when you draft with Copilot, which, is the other feature here, where I can say draft with Copilot, and have it generate. What I think is an appropriate response. Keep it, send it. All right, so I'm gonna move forward to my last demo here tonight. I know we are getting close to time. So
One more quick thing about Outlook.
Yep.
Is there any functionality available in Copilot for Outlook outside of the messages? So,
not as far as I'm aware of.
okay. I was just thinking it would be really awesome to be able to query it about the totality of the emails in your inbox. Like, I could have sworn somebody mentioned that we had a meeting on Friday at 2:00, but I don't see anything on my calendar. So just to be able to ask it, who mentioned a meeting at Friday at 2.
Yeah, so I know if you use like the big enterprise chat and you select the company data that uses the graph. So I
Okay.
think that might be a better source to be able to pull that back.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we're trying out. All right, so coming back to here, so these are all fictitious client names, tasks, even employee names. We anonymize this, but this is an export of our timekeeping for the year. You know, if I scroll down to the bottom, you know, there's roughly 4,000 or so entries that have been made so far. And let's say I want to gather some insights from the data that we have here. So the first thing is, in order to use Copilot, you have to take your data and turn it into a table. And I think this makes a lot of sense because, you know, Excel, you can have data all over the place, and it's not going to try to figure out what belongs to what. So creating a table, at least you're setting a structure to the content that you have in place. And coming within here, I can click on Analyze Data first. And this will go ahead and this will give me all sorts of different insights that I can foster from the data. Right? So I can, for example, insert this pivot chart. It's going to put it into this new aspect, and it's going to show me, like, what are the different roles that we've spent, you know, how many hours working against. And apologize, my mouse pointer kind of disappeared on me here. Okay, so I can show more results, and this gives me all sorts of information that it thinks I might be interested in. Now I can click on the Copilot button, and then I can start asking questions against this data set. And one of the interesting things here is that, you know, if you're not sure what to write, you can click on here, and this will start to help you with what are the available options and things that it can do for you, right? So I can analyze the data, and I can say, you know, analyze which client. Using most hours. So it'll go through, it'll understand that mask client is the name of a column that I'm in. It's going to understand hours is another column, and it's going to go ahead and bring me back some information on what I'm asking. In full transparency, I haven't been using Excel Copilot too much. I think I'm still trying to figure out the best use cases around it, to be honest. Because usually if I'm in Excel, you know, I need exact answers, and AI is better for when you're generating information, when you're summarizing information, not exactly if I need to do like a query like report. But that being said, see, came back with the answer. One of the most hours is Turn Digital with, you know, 4431. And if I add this to a new sheet, this gives me the further breakdown where I guess Quantum Labs is our next biggest, followed by Blaze Fitness. These are all fictitious names that we masked real data with. So it gives us, you know, it gives us a pretty good sense of where we're spending our time. Now, could I do this manually? Sure, I can go and create a pivot table. I could drag the fields on, I could apply a sort, I could then go and create a graph. But that's going to take me more than a few seconds at it just to Copilot to answer my question. Yeah, I think when we think about it, right, like in general, if you're in a position where you need a piece of information, you have a question, you know, I need to see my, you know, my sales data by region, you know, for the last 30 days, right? We're so natively trained today as IT professionals to go and translate that into a SQL query, into a, you know, something else, Excel formulas, what have you, to go and find that information. But if you have to take, or if you were to take the IT person out of it, if you were to say, hey, just speaking this into the mic will give you that result almost instantly. That adds a whole new area of value that, you know, we don't think about because we're trained mentally to just do it one way because that's how we've been doing it for the last 20 years, right?
We have a question online from Deb,
Yes.
hand raised.
Go ahead, Deb.
Hey guys. So I tried to put this in the chat and it wouldn't accept it. So, I mean, one of the big areas I see Copilot really helping out are the areas of business that are structured and reporting on compliance. Things like, let's say the 10Q for finance, or a summary report on manufacturing, or regulatory filing. Has anyone tried, I don't have access to Copilot, so I haven't been able to try this yet, but has anyone tried taking Copilot and saying, pointing to this data in this folder, saying complete the information that's in this template? Has anyone tried something like that yet? Because that's going to be a big one.
I don't know if, I mean,
Too broad.
essentially you'd have to grab basically you'd have to feed a prompt of whatever's in the document and ask it to fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
With some prompt engineering, you might be able to get some results out of that. I would say for anything that's regulatory related, you certainly would want to have a lot of scrutiny on the results and double, triple check everything.
Absolutely. That's what, I'm just thinking, you know, instead of having to hire a medical writer or a technical writer to do some of the work, you know, you can get yourself to even 50 or 60% there using Copilot. And then you start to go through that intensive review process that everyone goes through on any of this reporting.
In fact, Deb, since you mentioned that, there was just an incident in the news this week where I believe it was the company Lyft published their quarterly earnings after hours, and they had a typo in their filing. So instead of like 60% growth, like they filed, the CFO came out and said, "Oh, there was an extra zero tacked on. It's only 6%." So their stock like grew 50% in after hours trading, then crashed down like 80% before the markets opened. Because that 6% would have been worse than what they were expecting. But furthermore, you know, so that all being said, I wonder if maybe there was some new AI tools used with some of those.
Wonder, yeah. But that's where your QC is going to be important. So those are the resources you're going to have to put in place. But it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be a game changer for all of the industries. So thanks.
All right. So we have Marcel.
Chris Farah mentioned M365 chat. Could you show us how to get to that?
That's the bing.com/chat.
Okay.
All right. So
Product many.
so moving forward, so if you want to learn more about this, right? Whether you already have the licenses or you're thinking about buying them, or you're just curious about how the technology ties in together, these are 3 great resources I would highly recommend. The first one is really more of a technical documentation around how Copilot comes together and how to set it up. The next one is a learning pathway, which is basically free online training that Microsoft offers. It gives you a very comprehensive step-by-step of how this all comes together. And last but not least is the Microsoft Adoption Center. They have published a tremendous amount of collateral, not only on a high level, but by role, by improving your prompt engineering skills, how you can show the value to your team. So if you already have Copilot in your environment, I think the last link on here is going to be invaluable. If you're still thinking about it, I think the first 2 are probably going to be very helpful as well. All right. So that being said, I think we are just on time. I'll take a minute or so if any more questions, and anything after that we can continue over a beer later on.
Question for you.
Yep.
Is there an administrative panel where you can point it to like best bets type of solutions for all of the co-pilots?
There is an admin panel behind it that has some ways that you can massage the outcomes, manage your plugins.
Okay.
That's all covered in those links. It's not very comprehensive at this stage.
Right.
Sure. But it's something.
And user-centric?
No, it's just for admins. Question from Adam on the chat. Adam says he's been playing with ChatGPT for a while, but recalls it's had a short memory. If you ask follow-up questions, it will lose track. Do you see the same thing with Copilot? So large language models are essentially state machines, right? So they don't have a memory, they don't have a history. So if you want to go and remind GPT of what it previously said or what you previously said, you essentially have to include that as part of your prompt. Now, 365 will do some of that for you automatically. But for example, let's say you ask it, to summarize a 5-page document, it gives you a 1-page response, and now you want to ask 10 questions on it. Well, now for every incremental question, you're setting that entire previous history back and forth, right? So you very quickly start to run out of that token limit size. That being said, so far from what I've seen, I think it's been pretty good. I tend not to ask a ton of follow-up questions because I feel like if I didn't get the answer I was expecting, I personally would just try to do a different prompt, right? Because part of what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to learn the best way to do this as time progresses. And I think, taking 10 prompts to get a result of what I would expect out of the first prompt is not the way that I want to, train myself to work. So to answer your question, I haven't really used that use case too much, but I presume that because the Microsoft grounding helps a lot. I think it would be probably a little bit better than ChatGPT.
So just a quick elaboration on that. OpenAI just in the last like 2 days announced a new feature called extended memory that actually addresses this very function. To my knowledge, they're just starting to roll it out. So I imagine since this is based on that, and eventually we'll see it here in Copilot as well.
We have another question online about, does it generate how automate steps?
Yeah, I see. Anantha mentioned you could do up to 30 prompts. Thanks, Anantha.
Yes.
Andrea says, does it work well with generating Power Automate steps if you explain what you want it to do? Yeah, so that's one of the other products, right? That's the Copilot for Power Automate. In my experience, it does a pretty good job. And especially like if you're doing something like collecting results from a Microsoft form, where you have to build like that loop container to be able to go and iterate over each response and send. In my experience, yes, it works surprisingly well. Now, if you have like, a 58 stage workflow that has multiple branches and things like that, you would need to write, a very good prompt to explain it. And it would probably take some trial and error. But if you haven't played with that feature, I would highly recommend it. I actually use it myself when I need to build a workflow, and it's been pretty great.
I think it's also important to note you don't need the any extra licenses for that particular Copilot. That one's included.
That's right. Yep.
Which is awesome.
So one of the challenges we got, I know the size of customers that you guys deal with. They're probably fine with just spending time on the prerequisites part of that, right? Compliance, security, all of that. For us, it's just less than 300, 200. One of the questions we get all the time is that how many hours we need to spend, man hours / whatever, to just get to the point that we turn it on for this type of things. Any tips, tricks, anything? Like Microsoft has this fast track, but I'm not sure if they recently announced it. That could help with that.
Yeah, good questions. So just to repeat it for the online viewers. So the question is, there's a lot of groundwork that needs to happen before you can turn on the service. Kind of how many hours does it take to get ready for Copilot before you turn it on? So let's say we take aside the change management, right? Let's take aside the training, the communications, all of that stuff, right? If we focus just more purely on the tech side, the biggest concern with Copilot is that, whatever is exposed to your search engine is now on steroids, right? It's not that it's any less secure than what people can find using M365 search today. It's just they might ask a prompt that'll give them some information back that they shouldn't have access to. So
Dell panic all over again.
It's a Dell panic all over again. So how do you address that? So one is, you have periodic reviews where, you could use a tool like ShareGate, PnP tools to go and generate reports of site and look for anomalies, things where like, single files or folders have been shared out differently than what is the core of the organization. Find your anonymous links, right? Find all these aspects that need to be locked down. Furthermore, there's a number of tools through the new like SharePoint Advanced SKUs that have been announced recently, right? The advanced data governance, where it'll actually be able to generate some of these reports for you to find anomalies and security permissions across sites. In fact, I think one of the reports in particular will find people that have access into content in your sites that are not part of the top level members or owners group. That of course has its own SKU to it and all this good stuff, but ultimately it's just sitting down with each of the sites and content owners and saying, look, we're about to embark on this new feature. We think we might have some security holes. Let's do, a periodic review, and we'll do this quarterly, annually, however often you want to do them. But get that ball rolling, get those processes in place for the reports that you're going to generate, and get them to sign off that yes, does this still make sense, or no, we should lock this down. Okay, great question. Okay, so that being said, I'm going to pass the mic back to Bill for some closing slides. Thank you all for your time today.
So we have a speaker for next month. We're just trying to finalize it.
It's Ruben Gotts.
Oh,
The talk is to be determined, but Ruben Gotts is going to visit us here next month. That would be March 21st, is the third Thursday.
great. Thanks, David. I know you've been doing work on that. That's great. And, we are always looking for call for speakers, so feel free to reach out to us, send us an email or scan this barcode here. And again, we'll also work with you if you have any questions or you need help or assistance. Upcoming community events. So in April, we have the North American Collaboration Summit. The 365 Conference is also in April. And then Power Platform Conference.
Oh, I remember. It's Jeff Willinger, otherwise known as Jay Willie, will be speaking in April.
Oh. And PNP GitHub has a lot of online meetings that are really worth attending. I just attended one last week and they'll talk about Microsoft Embedded, so I learned a lot about that. It was really cool. So really worth it. I should go back and play the videos, but I tend to join them online and not play the videos. I'm like, I gotta go back and play these videos. So I guess I'm more of an in the moment person, like when I have time on my calendar. So I do have these on my calendar as tentative and I just go into them when I can.
They also do a really good job on their YouTube channel. They'll not only do the full sessions, but they'll break them up by demos when they have speakers doing different demos. So you can watch just segments of it too.
Demos,
It's really, you're absolutely right. They do great work there.
Yeah, I like it for the chat and the conversations.
Yeah.
And I'll just play it in the background while I'm working. And sometimes a demo will catch my attention. And some demos I'm like, oh, that's just too technical for me. But I just listen and I'm always picking something up. Additional community events, Women IT Pros, Power Addicts, and Power Hour, and the 365 Champion, which I have not checked them out recently. Related user groups in the area, feel free to check them out. And this is the part of the meeting where we talk about tips or problems or questions anybody has. So we open up the room and the mic online. If you want to ask any questions, we're all here. Good. I love hallucinations. I get tickets every now and then. Like somebody sent me a ticket and they asked me, oh, I want to set up column security in SharePoint. Like, well, there's no such thing as column security. You either see all the rows. They're like, no. I searched online on the internet and it says you can do column security. Yeah. Well, it hallucinated. It must have looked at other applications. And if you don't give it guardrails saying only SharePoint settings or something, it came back and the person gave me a nice detailed email about where I would go and where the settings would be and what it would be. I'm like, that would be great if Microsoft adds that, but it's not there.
I've seen some really good hallucinations where it's like, if this setting did exist, like Dimitri said, I think the most hallucinations come up with an AI's inability or lack of desire to say, I don't know. So you have to explicitly tell it, I don't know.
Or does it notice
the answer is, I don't know. It's just like, well, if that feature did exist, this is where you can go find it. And I've gone in because it's really convincing. It's like that would be a logical place for it to be if it did exist.
And
But I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist.
I think the developers would put it there.
Yeah.
It would go there.
But it's not there.
Any questions? Anybody have? Anybody online?
My questions are dynamics based.
So a huge thank you to Turn Digital again. If you ever come in person, we always have food here, brownies and, salad and ginger ale and Coke and pizza. So it really is worth attending in person if you have an opportunity to do it. 6 o'clock, and as you can see, we wrap up by 7:30 and we go out afterwards. So really encourage you to attend in person. Just let us know and book ahead of time. Again, the Microsoft Center here is no longer allowing walk-ins. So we do encourage you to go to our Eventbrite or our SharePoint page and register. Again, thank you to our previous sponsors who have helped the user group over the years, getting us going and started. So thank you. And this is the part where we turn off the recording and we open up the room and online to anybody looking to hire.